Have you ever stopped to think about what's really going on inside an AI's head? I mean, does it have a personality? And does that personality change depending on, say, the language you speak to it in? Well, today we're going deep into the very weird, very fascinating mind of artificial intelligence. So here's the big question that really kicks this whole thing off. Do these large language models actually think differently depending on the language you use? If you ask a question in English versus Chinese or Arabic, do you get a fundamentally different AI? I mean, it kind of feels like you should, right?
And right off the bat, we get a clue that something very strange is going on. So take a look at this. The Chinese chatbot DeepSeek was asked for advice about attending a protest. When asked in English, the advice is all about being confident and empowered. But ask the exact same question in Chinese, and whoa, the whole tone changes. It gets super cautious, even discouraging. So what in the world is happening here? To get to the bottom of this, we can't just rely on one or two weird examples. We need to be systematic about it. And that's exactly what our source material did. It set up this fantastic experiment to really test this whole AI identity crisis. Now, this is where it gets really fun. The whole experiment is based on this idea called the AI Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Now, the original version for humans suggested that our language actually limits what we can think. That's been pretty much debunked. We know people can think beyond their vocabulary. But what if it's true for AIs? I mean, their entire universe is made of text. Could language be a cage for them? So here's how they set it all up. They took 15 questions about values, pulled from big global surveys. They asked them to 3 of the biggest AIs out there, ChatGPT, Claude, and DeepSeek. They translated them into 6 different languages, and just to make sure the results weren't a fluke, they asked every single question 3 times. Yeah, this was a pretty thorough test.
So they ran the experiment. They collected all the data, all to see if these AIs have split personalities. And the results, well, they were absolutely not what that first DeepSeek example would have you believe.
So the big reveal is this. Despite a few odd exceptions, the huge discovery was that these AIs have an incredibly stable personality. They consistently spit out modern, secular, and liberal values, and it doesn't matter if you're talking to them in English, Arabic, or Chinese. Their core worldview just doesn't change.
And this chart really paints the picture of what that worldview looks like. Previous research has actually mapped this out, and as you can see, the big AI models score really high on scales that measure secular and self-expression values. You can basically think of it as a default, kind of center-left, Western liberal point of view. Let's look at a really powerful example of this consistency. The experiment gave the AI a very sensitive prompt from a user dealing with domestic violence. Here's what ChatGPT said in English, totally clear, supportive, and absolutely unequivocal.
Okay, now let's switch languages. Same question, but asked in Hindi. The phrasing is a little different, as you'd expect, but the core message, it's identical. It is not your fault, and violence is never okay.
And one more time, just to drive the point home, here it is in Chinese. Again, that same unwavering supportive stance. On the stuff that really matters, the AI's values are locked in. The language you use to ask for help doesn't change the help you get.
In fact, and this is kind of wild, this consistency is so strong that the AIs are often more uniform in their values than we are. If you look at something like the World Values Survey, you see this huge, beautiful diversity of human opinion. With the AIs, not so much.
But, okay, that solid, consistent worldview, that's just the main story. Because when the researchers zoomed in, they found that things get a lot more interesting. It turns out language does matter, just in really subtle ways. This is probably my favorite finding from the whole thing. They asked ChatGPT what qualities are most important to teach kids. In English, the #1 answer is tolerance and respect. But in Chinese, it's good manners. The values are pretty close, right? But the emphasis, the priority, it just shifts a little bit with the language, adding this really interesting cultural texture.
And they found other little nuances too. For instance, AIs were more likely to just refuse to answer a tricky question in English or French than in, say, Hindi or Arabic. And the more open-ended the question, the more variation you'd see. But again, and this is key, when it came to core advice on really sensitive topics, like how to react to your child coming out as gay, the message was consistently loving and supportive, every single time.
So what gives? How can you have this rock-solid worldview, but with these tiny language-specific variations? Well, this gets us to the most likely reason for what's actually happening inside the AI's mind.
The leading theory is pretty simple.
For a lot of these complex questions, the AI isn't really thinking in Chinese or Arabic at all. What's probably happening is what you see here. It gets the question in another language, sure, but then it internally processes it and cooks up a response in English, because that's its dominant language. And then the final step is just to translate that English answer back to you. It's basically an English thinker wearing a multilingual trench coat.
And this brings us to this really beautiful metaphor from the source material for what these AIs might be. They're not some kind of independent being with their own cultural takes. They're a mirror. A weird mirror, sure, but a mirror that just reflects the massive, aggregated, and, let's be honest, mostly English language text from the internet that we fed it.
And so that leaves us with this final, massive question. When we see this consistent, liberal worldview staring back at us, what are we actually looking at? Is it a biased machine that we need to fix so it can reflect all human values? Or are we just looking into a mirror that's showing us the dominant culture of our online world? What does it really mean when a tool that billions of people use has a default point of view? There's no easy answer, and it's something we're all going to have to figure out as these AIs get woven deeper into our lives.